Welcome to the Tucker Rec Center. We really appreciate you guys coming out tonight and taking part in our public input meeting. Just so you know, Barge was 100% responsible for the weather today. So take it easy on them.
I'm glad they got that kind of control.
That's right. That's right. That's how good they are. But I'm going to turn it over to Steve with Barge.
Thanks, Rip. My name is Steve Provo. I'm with Barge Design Solutions, and we've been hired by the city to put together the Park System Comprehensive Plan. It's a citywide plan. I recognize a lot of you from the previous public meeting, so I appreciate you being here to hear some of the results of what we've been doing. And the purpose for this meeting is to show you what we've done so far, which has mostly been gathering information, which is what we were doing at our previous meeting. We also got information from the community in a couple of other ways. And what we want to do today is show you what we heard from you and from the public and what that data means. So that's the gist of what we're doing today. And we'll have an opportunity at the end if you have questions, but I may answer a lot of your questions during the presentation, but I'd be happy to take your questions when we get to the end of it. And then we're also going to have an opportunity for input from in various different ways, but the bulk of our public input has happened, and we will continue to hear from you if there's other things that you want to make sure that we hear. I'm here with my colleague, Mike Svets. Mike is with Pros Consulting. That's a national recreation planning firm that we team with frequently on these types of projects. He came in to see us all the way from sunny Phoenix, Arizona. And Mike.
It's actually not that much warmer there, believe it or not.
And my colleague Laura Bradford. Laura is in my office here in Atlanta and works with me to produce these plans. This is an overview of the items that we're going to be looking at today. I want to show you the public input responses, and that's going to include to confirm what we heard from you during the public meeting and to show you what we got on the comment cards and people wrote to us, the information that we got from those. We've also put out a public community input survey. And we'll talk to you about what that survey was about and how it was conducted. But we're going to show you the data that we got from that. And because of the method that we used to get that information, we're able to show it to you in a very detailed manner. So we're going to show you the responses we got from across the community about some questions about your park system. And then we're going to talk about your existing level of service. And I'll explain that to you when we get to that piece. But basically, it's going to show you how your existing park service is serving you today and how it's serving this population today. And then I'll show you what we're doing next in the project, the next steps of each phase of the elements that we're in. We're a little more than halfway through the project right now. What we are not doing today is showing you park plans or park recommendations yet. It may seem like a very slow process to you, but we methodically look at every element of your park system, and we very methodically get information from the community. So that's where we are today. We want to show you what we heard from you. And you probably will find some of it interesting. Some of it you'll see and you'll say, yeah, I'm not surprised by that. And some of the responses you might be surprised by. But that's what we're going to accomplish today. This is our planning process. It has 5 steps, but I like to break it down into 3 chunks. Phase 1 was our research and analysis, which we have completed. Phase 2, we have mostly completed community research and part of the needs assessment. That's where we are right now. And then phase 3 will be developing plan recommendations, and that's what our next meeting will be with our presentation to City Council, public meeting, presentation of draft recommendations. And then the implementation plan is really the putting the document together that will outline how do you accomplish these goals that are being recommended during the plan. So these are the items in phase 1, the demographic trends analysis, We looked at your introduction of level of service, existing facilities, your service areas, your current management structure and financial structure of your Parks Department plan. And then phase 2 included interviews and focus groups, which we did just before our last public meeting, the public needs assessment workshop, which was the meeting that you all, many of you attended the last time, and the public survey, which is going to be the bulk of what we're showing to you today. And then the needs analysis and level of service recommended are the next task we'll do before we start phase 3. There's a lot going on in the city right now, and the city has all of the consultants engaged with each other. So we do meet together and talk with each other about findings from the different plans. So I am getting input from, for example, the people that are doing the Trails Master Plan, the Transportation Plan, and I'm providing them information as well. Some of the feedback we got in the survey is relevant to some of the work that we're doing. But these projects are going on, and we are aware of them, they're aware of what we're doing, and the city staff is doing a good job of keeping each of these consulting teams engaged with each other so that the findings inform each of the plans as they go together. The public outreach process included the focus group meetings and the assessment input meetings, but also the public input meeting that happened right here. And I want to show you some of the findings that we got from that meeting. Part of what we were looking at was finding out from the community what facilities were the most important, and we provided a list of recommendations of what you might consider important, and of course we took notes and written recommendations as well. But of all the information we got back from those, these were the facilities that were the top. Actually, it's not 5, it's the top 7 facilities is what we put on the list. And the top ones are walking and hiking trails, both natural surface trails, which was number 1, and multi-use paved trails was number 2. Restroom buildings, community gardens, multi-purpose fields, that's for soccer, lacrosse, you can play football on them and other sports. You got equal number of votes for playgrounds and mountain bike trails, and then also dog parks. Now this is from the meeting that happened here in this room. We also looked at, and we will show you the feedback we got from the written survey. And there's a lot of overlap, but we like to do both. And then the programs we looked at, community special events. This is concerts and festivals, outdoor programs, so natural or nature programs, environmental education, performing arts program, gardening classes, and having farm-to-table events and classes. And again, tied for the same place, number 6. Fitness and wellness programs such as Tai Chi and yoga, as well as senior programs and services, and then youth soccer programs. And then this is some of how we also got all the comments. You probably not read those, but we did write them all down. And in some cases, and we got some on comment cards, and we still have comment cards here today if you have additional input that you want to give to us. We wrote them all down, and if people said things once, twice, 8 times, we categorized what we heard and how often we heard it. And all of the comments, these are the top written comments that we've gotten from the notes and the input. But number 1 was a big one: more parks, green space, community ground, active, passive, multi-use parks. So more park stuff. Connectivity to parks via trails and paths was a big comment area. We saw a request for adult playgrounds. So a lot of people asked for playgrounds, and some people were asking for adult playgrounds. So equipment that adults can be using. Improve and enhance the recreation center. That's the building we're in now. Make Henderson Park a destination. A lot of people had comments about Henderson Park. It's your biggest park. And comments we heard inside of that is needs playground. There are playgrounds. People are looking for more. Needs a walking, jogging, bike trail. It's lacking street lights and could have better access to the lake. These are the types of comments that we got, and of course we like I said, we documented all of the comments, but these are the things that we thought you'd be interested in that rose to the top. We also keep and utilize the map that all of you wrote on. You put notes on here, you put diagrams on here where you thought paths could go, where new parks could go, where parks needed to be improved. These are just a few of the areas where we saw that information. We keep that and we use it. It's up in my office right now, and that's going to help inform us with the recommendations in addition to the comments and information we get from the survey. So that's a brief overview of the information we got from the public. We had shown you in a previous meeting where we also had heard from the focus groups. We've also done a statistically valid survey, and I want my colleague Mike Spatz to go over the survey, what the survey was, and what the data was that we got back. It's a ton of information and a lot to absorb, but it's great stuff, and I'm going to let Mike take that from here.
Sure. Okay. So, how many people like numbers? Okay. So, for those of you who don't like numbers, I've got a little trick for you. At some point, those who don't like numbers are going to want to just start to fade off. So, take your thumb and your forefinger and rub your earlobes for about 30 seconds. It'll give you about 7 more minutes of attention. You'll help me be able to get through this because I won't see anybody nodding off. So this is very data driven. So when we talk about a statistically valid survey, it's almost algorithm in terms of how the random sampling occurs. Not everybody gets a survey. How many people in this room got a survey? Okay. So that's a pretty good idea of how random it is. But ETC Institute is a firm out of Olathe, Kansas, and their whole business is all about doing statistically valid surveys. They primarily do statistically valid surveys for municipal governments in two areas. One is transportation, which is all critically important to any community, and the second one is parks and recreation. Their charge at the end of the day is to get a random sampling of your community that is both demographically, so population, age, race, ethnicity, income levels, but also geographically balanced. So what you are about to see is a random sampling of 400 households. Does not mean that it's just 400 people representative, but it's 400 households that are representative of your community. And it will give you an insight into how people feel about your park and recreation system, and also some of the I'll try to connect some of the dots along the way with regards to how people responded or provided their responses.
Mike,
so
one of the things people tend to ask is how many surveys went out in the first place?
I'm sorry? Oh, usually it's about 1,000 to 1,200 in a community of your size. So we did receive about 400 back. Most of the time people respond nowadays via the web, the internet, and they can only use a specific code once. So they can't pass it off to their family members to answer it a second and third time. Or they can mail it in. And again, everything's coded so that one household that received it can only, respond back. It avoids a lot of what I would call all the ballot box stuffing that can occur if you got a special interest group that just wanted to have 500 or 600 of their members try to answer the survey. So 95% confidence level means that if you did this survey 100 times, you would get the same results 95 out of 100 times, plus or minus 5%. So this becomes, I guess, the methodology and the response rates and the geographically and demographically balance creates a statistically valid survey. So we asked a series of questions, and I'm going to frame this in different kind of buckets. One of the very first questions that we asked early on in the survey is, how do people feel about the benefits that Parks and Recreation provides to your community. I won't go through every last one of these, but you can see that dark blue means that people strongly agree with that benefit statement. The light blue means that they agree. Every one of these potential benefits, whether it's a more desirable place, whether it impacts economic business development, whether it provides, clean, pleasing, aesthetically pleasing landscaping, helps promote tourism, helps to reduce crime. Every one of these statements, over 50% of folks either strongly agreed or agreed with these statements. Why is this important? This means that people value, your community values parks and recreation. And they recognize that it's not just about cutting grass and providing playgrounds in your system. That there are other things that park and recreation contributes to your community. And that's important because it's almost as if to say it's an advocacy statement for you. That parks and recreation is important to you as a community. Level of satisfaction. So people find it to be extremely important to your community, but you're also a new city. A city that took over a park and recreation system from the county. And I think you all will agree that the county maybe didn't hand it over to the city in the best possible condition. So that does not happen overnight. So this statement in terms of level of satisfaction is not necessarily, and I preface this very carefully to say, this is not a reflection or an indictment on the city and its current Parks and Recreation Department. It is a reflection of the system that was provided to the city to take over and what it has to work with. So, very satisfied, only 6% of the community is very satisfied with the Park and Recreation system. The national benchmark, and ETC has done probably close to over 1,000 different surveys across the country in the last 15 years related to Parks and Recreation. The national benchmark is 29%. So there's a lot of improvement, but also that provides a lot of opportunity for improvement to take place. The idea, one thing to kind of really point out is that there's only 18% of the community that is somewhat dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. So you've got a lot of people that are kind of in the middle that you need to move to the blue and make sure that you hold the line on the red parts of this pie chart. Percent of folks who have used specific park and recreation facilities in the last 12 months. Now let me preface this by saying usually we ask the question in such a way that says, have you visited a park or used a trail? The city wanted to know specifically what people were using. So a national benchmark for generally using any park is somewhere around 78%. Your highest level of usage is your signature park, or soon to be your signature park, Henderson Park, at 44%. This facility is next at 27%. So, and then everything else kind of tails off from there. Peters Park barely registered on the survey. So there is opportunities for improvement. So why are these utilization rates low? Why are these visitation rates low? Goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that the city inherited a system from the county that maybe wasn't in the best condition. And you all agree. Your system is not in the best condition. The dark blue means that people rated each one of these locations as excellent. National benchmark for rating systems as excellent is closer to 30%. Henderson and paved trails were at 20%. So why is utilization low? Because the condition of parks aren't necessarily up to snuff. That's one reason. Why people haven't visited parks. Another big reason is people just aren't aware of the system. The national benchmark for not aware of park and trail locations is 34%. In Tucker, that's 69%. That's almost double the national average.
39.
I'm sorry, 39, my bad. I was thinking of something else. Hang on that, 39%. So, but it's still high. It's still higher than the national benchmark. It's not double. Use of parks and trails in other cities is at 27%. The national benchmark for that is 11. So you've got some barriers here. People not feeling safe in parks. So I'm a recovering Parks and Recreation director, and I can tell you that 80% of the comments or complaints that we received, whether I was in Ohio, Virginia, or Arizona, were because parks were not clean and parks were not in repair or they were not safe. Those are the two biggest things for a public park system, is to make sure that they're clean and to make sure that they're safe. Meaning the infrastructure, your playgrounds, your benches, your fencing, everything feels safe. Like you're not going to get physically hurt, or your kids aren't going to get physically hurt, or your grandkids aren't going to get physically hurt. That rating here is at 18%. National benchmark is about 13. So there are other reasons, but again, there are a number of reasons in addition that contribute to the condition rating, but also contribute to the lack of utilization. So the visitation and condition summary, the three big takeaways. You have below average utilization of your system. You have below average what we call condition ratings of your system. And lack of awareness is the main contributor to why people don't use your park. But I would also add in that your condition of your system being not up to snuff is also a contributor of low utilization. So let's talk about programs. So we asked questions how people were not aware, 39%, which was above the national average, people were not aware of the location of parks and recreation, either parks, trails, or facilities. The way people find out about programs and services in parks is primarily through friends and neighbors. Almost 60% of the information they get about the parks, programs, and services is from each other. And there's nothing wrong with that other than the fact that the city's not controlling the message. So everybody has played that telephone game at some point, right? You know how that message gets disseminated and it's not accurate by the time you get to like that fifth or sixth person. It's the exact same issue that you have going on here. Friends and neighbors is number one. Facebook is number two. So when we talk social media, there's three biggies out there. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You are a Facebook community. And then the third one is the city website. National benchmark for friends and neighbors is 49%. So you're 10% above that. Facebook is 25, so you're kind of in the ballpark. City website is 37, you're a little bit below that. So we have to ask the question, that's how people learn about it, but how do people want to learn about the system? This is very important to debunking or providing the information that's necessary so that people don't continually answer the question, I'm not aware. Number one is email. Number two, city website. So the first two on the list are technology driven. The third one is the old school flyers and newsletters that go out through, whether they're located here or they go out through the school system. Fourth is Facebook. And then fifth is temporary signs. Friends and neighbors is middle of the pack at 9%. 9% of folks would prefer to receive information from friends and neighbors. But right now, it's 59%. So a marketing, I guess you could almost say, you could see a marketing recommendation coming out of these results. Percent of households participating in recreation programs in the last 12 months. 15%. National benchmark, 32. And I'll go into contributing reasons as to why. Overall rating of the system of programs and services, of the 15% of people that have taken programs and services through the city, 25% view them as excellent, 57% good. National benchmark for excellent is 34. But when you look at excellent and good, it's 82%. So those are quality programs and services, but we have to get more people to participate in them. Reasons for not participating. This is where I got my 69% from. Sorry. I don't know what is offered. Make that connection back to what we just went through. How people are receiving information versus how they want to receive information. That is the #1 thing to get across. It's more than double of anything else that's on that list. Anybody doing this yet? Okay. So programs and service summary. Word of mouth is currently the way people learn about programs and services. The way people would prefer to learn. Top 2 reasons are technology driven. Email, city website. There's below average participation in programs. It's below average rating of quality of programs. And I only say that because you're a tick below, the national average when it comes to rating programs and services as excellent. And then lack of awareness is the key contributor to why people are not participating in programs. So what are the needs of your community? So Steve and Laura and Mary were here last time, and they collected a lot of information from you about what you want to see offered. One of the things that you will see is as we compare the qualitative information to what we received in the survey, you'll see a lot of things very, very similar. So one of the things we always ask people, what's most important to you? But that doesn't necessarily translate into needs. One of the questions we ask is, what are the unmet needs of the community? And I know this is a very confusing chart, but bear with me. What we wanted to know is any one of these programs, if there was 50% or less of the community that felt like that need was being met. So I'll give you an example. Special events was #1. You all want more special events. That's what, at the end of the day, that's what that is saying. It's not saying that the city doesn't offer them. It's that you want more of them. And that your need for special events is not even being met 50% of the time. So some of you may say, I want to go to a special event once a month. What this says is that the city isn't offering at least 6 of them. So you want 12 over the course of the year. The city's not offering even 6 of them. Fitness and wellness programming, #2. Not surprising, it's usually very high in communities this day and age. Adult learning, garden classes, farm-to-table classes, events, senior programs and services, art classes. Community special events can be large, they can be small. Most of the time they're held outdoors because you have large gathering spaces. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th are all programs that you need indoor spaces for, or primarily need indoor spaces for. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Then you have outdoor programs, environmental education programs, performing arts, and then water fitness. Basically, what this is starting to indicate is where you have demand, but the city's not providing enough supply to meet your needs. In terms of what's important, this is really, really critical. So not only are you seeing the programs that people want more of, it's almost the exact same list in the exact same order of what people find most important to them. So people want these programs, these are what we want, and you aren't providing enough of what we are at the top of the list. That's really, really important. If we saw this upside down, that would simply kind of indicate that the city was providing programs that were important to you, but if your needs were being met, you wouldn't see an unmet need being very, very high. So facilities and amenities, same exercise. Number one thing of 50 unmet needs, 50% or less. Top two are trails. Unpaved trails or paved trails is number one. Natural surface trails is number two. Restroom buildings. I'm so glad the city asked that as a choice, because sometimes that is so overlooked in terms of providing a quality experience. You never know sometimes when you gotta go. And if you're gonna be in a park, you wanna have a restroom facility that's clean and safe and in repair for you to use. Indoor pool, natatorium, dog parks kind of round out the top five. Pavilions, picnic sites, guys are a community that likes to party outside. And amphitheater, senior center, playgrounds kind of round out almost the top 10 there. But again, these are your unmet needs. These means you have a demand for these programs and services, but the city's not even meeting 50% of your needs. Facilities that are most important, again, almost, maybe a tick or two off, but trails were the top two. Dog parks was number 3 in terms of importance. Playgrounds 4, indoor pool 5, restroom buildings kind of came in 6, senior center. So the top 10, maybe they're not 1 through 10 the exact same way, but you certainly start to understand where your community is at in terms of prioritizing what they want in the system, that's the built environment, as well as then the experiences that they want to see provided as part of the built environment. So another question we asked, and this is tied back to the trails component and tied back to your trails master plan, is would you be willing to walk or bike to a park if the path was safe and well maintained? So clean and in repair. 83% said yes. 7% say they do it already. 10% said no. So this is another way of reinforcing the fact that trails are a really critical component of what you all want out of your park and recreation system. How supportive would you be of having a paved trail that basically connected the east and west sides of Henderson Park? 57% of folks said very supportive, 20% said supportive, and another 15% were neutral, likely because they weren't probably quite sure exactly what that meant. So 77% of folks were, I guess, very supportive or supportive of connecting the two sides of the park. It's kind of your signature park. To create those connections that are pedestrian, bike, stroller friendly, people are indicating are very important to you as an improvement specific to that park. So public support. I started with your advocacy. So let's talk about the support that people would have for improvements to your system. What do people most support? Number 1, taking care of what you inherited from the county. By far, number 1. 69% of folks said the thing that they would be most supportive of is, and very supportive of, is taking care of what you already have. The second, the third, and the fourth, all about trails. So whether it's taking care of existing, whether it's building new, or whether it's adding trails internal to your parks, then you get to your special event. So I will say your community is very in tune. So when you answer this survey, you're maybe not necessarily connecting the dots between how you answered a question previously in the survey to how it impacts how you answer a question later on. This is very, very consistent because you said you want special events. You said you want trails, and you're basically clamoring for an improved park and recreation system based on your condition results. As far as things that people are most willing to fund, so it's one thing to be supportive of something. It's another thing to be willing to fund it. Exact same thing. Number one, 39% take care of existing parks. 2, 3, and 4, trails, trails, trails. Number 5, again, community events. Exact same order of funding, willingness to fund, as it was that you would be supportive of the actions that the city would take to improve your system. So a summary, improvements to the existing system. Take care of what you already have, improve your existing trail system, add loop trails to your existing parks. Expanding the system, number 1, adding trails. Number 2, adding a plaza for special events. And number 3, developing new parks. What are people most willing to fund? What are you most willing to fund? What's the community most willing to fund? Repair parks, trails, trails, trails. And then developing that new plaza for special events. You can kind of start to see the prioritization start to unfold as you go through this survey. So we've taken a stab at prioritizing your input, whether it was input provided at this meeting, whether it's input that was provided through this survey. So instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to 30, we just kind of group things into high priority, medium priority, low priority. So everybody's going to look at the high, and you already know what that is because I just spent a lot of time going through that with you. But you're going to look at the things that are low. Low does not mean that you don't do it. Low means that a couple of things, why it ranks low. You have a small user group that is going to be participating in that. So I used this example this afternoon with staff. Youth basketball, youth sports. I'll just use youth basketball. A community of your size to put together a youth basketball program, a successful program would probably see about 300 kids in that. 300 kids. So let's just multiply that by 3 because of mom, dad, sibling, or grandparent that goes and watches the son or daughter play. 1,000 people. Your community is going to be 40,000 people in about 15 years. So that's why these things start to end up being lower, because they're either age specific and or very skill oriented specific. So I made the statement, you're not going to run youth basketball programs 365 days a year. You're going to focus that on a specific season for a specific age group that has a specific interest in playing in that sport. Again, same thing when you start to talk about the low on the facility side of the equation. We all know that a staple of a park and recreation system is athletic fields. But you don't put athletic fields in every park. You strategically locate them to the parks that can handle them based on the size and the supporting amenities to them. Doesn't mean that you don't invest in them, it's just that you're very strategic. But people want walking trails and biking trails and hiking trails throughout your community. People want restroom buildings. People want probably more than just one off-leash area for dogs. Here's the problem with not having a dog park. Where does the community go when you don't have a dog park to let your dog run?
Henderson Park.
Gwinnett County.
I'm sorry?
Gwinnett County.
Athletic fields.
What's that?
Athletic fields.
Athletic fields. Why? Because it's a fenced-in area. But what don't you have at an athletic field that you would have at a dog park? Doggy bags. So what happens to your athletic field if people are going there to use them as your dog park? What do kids end up playing in? So it's critically important. This is a very big issue, not just in Tucker, but it's a very big issue across the country. Dog parks are extremely important to the community because people love their dogs, but people usually love other people that have dogs. Laura and I had a quick conversation earlier. She has a lab mix. I have 2 Goldens. Immediately we hit it off. People love to socialize with and about their dogs. It's a community value. And it's not just a community value in Tucker, but you need to be able to provide the right best places for that to happen. Because we just talked about what happens to athletic fields and kids playing on athletic fields if people are using them as dog parks. So again, this starts to formulate the experiences that people want in your system, and in some cases, the amenities that are necessary to bring those ratings up about the quality of your system. And in a nutshell, you need to be able to take care of what you already have, what you inherited from the county. So this starts to create, and you can kind of see where some of this is going without us putting pen to paper when it comes to hard and fast recommendations. This is kind of a nutshell of the prioritization of how your community values your parks and recreation system and what they want the city to provide and plan to provide going forward. I will turn it back over to Steve. Thanks, folks. I didn't see
too much of this. I mentioned that we were going to look at level of service as well, and what this means is we're looking at how does your park system, your existing park system, serve the size and type of community that you have. So at this point what we're doing is we're assessing your existing level of service, and some of it has to do with these maps that we put up over here. I know some of you have gotten to take a look at them, so I'll show to you where this is heading and what we're doing. We start with looking at your park system. We always have a map out so we know where all of the Tucker parks are and where they're located in the community. But what becomes important to us as we consider the level of service is how well is the geographic location of those parks serving your population. And so we'll take a look at where they are and what their service areas are. We also look at what is inside of each of those parks. And we put those into a facility matrix. And I know you can't read all of these from the back, but what we're doing is we're listing all of your parks here and the types of program elements, the facilities that are in each of those parks. And the way we look at parks is we consider them as developed parks or undeveloped parks. And to us, an undeveloped park, well, a developed park doesn't mean that you have something on every bit of the park. It doesn't mean that it's all buildings or athletic fields or parking lots or something. What it means to be a developed park means that it provides accessibility for the population overall. That is, that you have at least some aspect of the park is handicap accessible, that you have emergency access into the park and maintenance access into the park, probably some restroom facilities, the types of elements that a population would need to use it. That doesn't mean that you can't have a conservation park where you have a small area to park, a car, maybe a restroom building, and maybe a trail, but the developed building and parking lot is 5% of the site, and the other 95% is conservation area with paths in it. That's still a developed park if we can get safety, maintenance, handicap accessibility into the park. So that's how these, that's how we break these out. And what we start to look at first is your acreage. Your developed acres of park is 180.32 acres. And then your, what we consider undeveloped parks is 89.59 acres of park. And so that becomes important when we think of your overall level of service. That is, how many acres of park per 1,000 population do you have in this city? We look at the location of your parks. This is what we call a gap analysis. And what we're looking at is the gaps between the service areas of the parks. So these are all your developed parks with a service area around each one. It either has a 2-mile service area, a 1-mile service area, or a half-mile service area. And that relates to the size of the park and the kind of park that it is how we determine whether it's a very big service area or a relatively small one. But you can see by these service areas that your developed parks are all in the north and west portion of the city. Doesn't mean there aren't parks in the rest of the city, but that's your developed parks. But we also want to know where are your undeveloped parks and what do their service areas look like. And so we've mapped those as well. And some of those do come into the Smoke Rise area and the other areas of the eastern part of the park, and we have additional undeveloped parks in the southwest portion of it. And when we look at those together, that gives us a full picture of the gap analysis, at least a really quick assessment of what portions of the city are not being served geographically by your parks. You know, a lot of the stuff that Mike went over with you shows you what programs and facilities are good in this community and which ones are lacking. This one shows geographically just where are the parks and how well are they serving your community. And it will become important when we make recommendations, particularly if it turns out that our recommendations lead to additional parkland in the next 10, 20 years, in addition to what you have now. Where should we focus on looking at that parkland? Well, it may be a good idea to look in these areas that are underserved now. Now, some of this, of course, is light industrial. There may or may not be parks in those areas, but a lot of it is still community. And some of the areas that do have parks still might have a need for different kinds of parks than are there today. So we still may be making recommendations for some of these areas that are in the service areas to have additional parkland, even though they're already appear to be being served by other parks. So the acreage, as I went over with you, becomes important as we look at the level of service based on population. And the way we do that is, as I mentioned, what kind of acreage you have serving your population size. So the population size we looked at was based on an estimated 2018 population of, I believe it was 35,217. Yeah, I know. I just did the math today. I was checking all the math. And so with this much acreage, that puts us at 7.6 acres per 1,000. Which doesn't mean anything to most people. You know, what does that mean? Who cares? What it means is it lets us begin to look at how this community is providing acreage based on your population that you can consider, are you the kind of community that wants tons, lots and lots of acreage close to everybody, or very specialized acreage and it doesn't maybe doesn't need to be as much. It also allows you to look at what does this number look like when I look at other communities? And so if you care about how we rank and compared to other communities, we can do that as well. And I can do that for you. I can show you other areas that we have looked at and show you what this number looks like in other communities. But before I do that, I want to preface it by saying not all park systems calculate their park acreage the same way. So you're not always comparing apples to apples. But it is still an interesting thing to do, is to see where does this fall within the ranks of other communities. And so we looked at some that are in the metro area: Alpharetta, Sandy Springs, Roswell, Tucker, Johns Creek, Dunwoody, and we arranged them in order of acres per thousand, the level of service for park acreage. 7.6 puts you sort of in the middle of the pack, and so you can see where you rank. Johns Creek has the lowest level of service currently for their park acreage. Dunwoody's is relatively low also. And then you'll see that Alpharetta, quite high at 12.64. Sandy Springs 9.66 and Roswell 9.52. Now I mentioned that we're not always comparing apples to apples. You don't always know what a community is counting as park acreage or not. I'll give you an example of that. I know that the city of Sandy Springs considers an asset to their community to have national recreation acreage in their city. They don't run it, they don't own it, but they have direct access to it, and they consider that an asset, and so they use it. And so you see this 1,000 acres of parks there. Part of that is national recreation area. And the only reason we know is, well, mainly we know is because we're working with them. And we wondered if Roswell is doing the same thing, because they have access to river parks as well. And so we looked and said, are you including them in there? Their number is relatively close. They don't. That's all city parks. So it's not easy to necessarily compare them directly. It's still an interesting benchmark. And so that's what we do, as we take a look at it and say, well, how are we ranking in that benchmark? Considering the feedback we got from the survey, so much of it was focused on let's improve what we have. And this is a pretty good level of service for your population. I don't know that, we don't know yet, because we're going to go through the recommendation analysis process, but the recommendation for proposed future level of service probably won't be 12.64. You know, you may not have the need for that level right now. You have a great park system now. The acreage is great, and there's a lot that you can do with that. So there may be a recommendation for a slightly increased level of service, but this is where you rank with the other ones. The next things we're going to do in this project is to develop plan recommendations. I had mentioned that we are here in phase 2. We've got a couple of tasks left to do in the needs assessment, and then based on the feedback that we got, we're going to put together draft recommendations coming out of the feedback and the needs assessment. And those recommendations are going to be presented to City Council on January 28th. That date, I just learned that date today. That date has been set for January 28th. So that's going to be one of the next things that happens. Our team is going to be using the feedback we get from you to develop a draft set of plans. It will not be the final, we'll still be looking for input. And then following that, we'll do an implementation plan, and that's basically step-by-step guidelines of how do you get there in the next 5, 10, 20 years. How do you implement this plan and these recommendations, and how do you pay for it? So those are the next things that are coming up. That step 3, you know, the phase 3 that we are about to be going into, strategic implementation action plan, an operational and staffing plan. This is specifically for your Parks Department. Strategic implementation action plan workshop with the city. Budgeting and funding. We'll look at ways to pay for these recommendations. How can they actually get on the ground, and then we'll be putting together the draft and final report for that process. The ways that you can stay engaged, we still want to hear from you. This is not a so much of an input session. As I said, I'm going to take your questions, but it's not as much of an input meeting as it is for us to give you information about what we've learned so far. But we want you to stay engaged. We do have cards, comment cards. If you have more information that you want us to know, you can write it down. You can also email it to our park director, Rick Robertson. His email is rrobertson@tuckerga.gov. That's also on the website, so you can find it there. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be presenting the draft recommendations on January 28th at a public meeting, public city council meeting. So those are the next things that are happening in ways that we want to continue to hear from you. Mike and I are open to any questions that you have about what we presented, or any questions in addition to that.
I just want to make one statement very quickly. I think it's, Steve mentioned 5, 10, 20 years. You've inherited a system that obviously is not up to snuff, and certainly not, you're very satisfied or even somewhat satisfied with. So if you really think about, and this isn't sexy, right? We're not in the business of creating a visionary plan that draws a bunch of pretty pictures about things that could happen. This has to be first and foremost, and you all asked for this. This is a community plan for your park system. This really has to be focused first and foremost, not to say that there are not additional parallel paths, but taking care of what you already have. You have to start to have a greater part of this community engaged in your parks and recreation system. And the only way to do that is to start to what we call life cycle replace out all those things that you see at a park that you just are eyesores to you. So whether it's fencing, or whether it's playgrounds, or whether it's parking lots, or whether it's benches, or whether it's pavilions, or whether it's paving on trails, those things need to happen first. And here's why. Everything new that you put in a park and recreation system eventually gets old.
Stating that
just
seems
like
obvious,
us, right?
Everything
Everything has a life cycle to it. You have to take care of the assets that exist in your park and recreation system now, because you can go and build a bunch of new stuff, but you're going to have a bunch of old stuff too. You need to be able to bring your existing system up to snuff and then start to add to it. This is what you all asked for. So if you really we want this to be an implementable plan that changes your park and recreation system going forward. First thing that has to happen is to take care of what you already have. And potentially build that dog park. And probably figure out what you're going to do with this recreation center.